Welcome to Coding, your weekly guide to the latest news and stories shaping the cybersecurity world. This week, well, we're looking at a threat landscape that's got this kind of stunning contradiction. You've got sophisticated AI agents figuring out how to steal data without even a click. But at the same time, organizations are still getting hammered because they haven't patched critical flaws we've known about for months.
That's absolutely right. It's a real gap. We've looked at sources covering three pretty urgent topics that really highlight this. Everything from the, basic security hygiene needed for critical infrastructure, right up to the rise of this dynamic malware that basically builds itself on the fly using large language models. Our mission today is really to cut through that noise so you know exactly what strategic lessons you need to take away from these recent events.
Okay, let's unpack this then. And we're starting where, well, almost every cybersecurity conversation has to begin, the patching imperative. Because Gavos flagged some immediate threats, and they really prove attackers are moving faster than we are.
Yeah, we really have to start with the Ivanti warning. CISA put out an alert pretty recently about two high-severity flaws in Ivanti's Endpoint Manager Mobile EPMM. And what really elevated this, beyond just a simple patch note, was that attackers were actively chaining these two vulnerabilities together out there in the wild.
Chaining them. And when you look at what those two flaws were, it's pretty deadly. The first one, CVE 2025-4427, was a high-severity authentication bypass. It's a 7.5 out of 10. Basically lets an attacker just walk past the front door, no credentials needed.
Exactly. And the second one, CVE 2025-4428, gave them remote code execution capability. That's a major 8.8 out of 10 score. So chaining them means the attackers weren't just, hitting an unpatched system. They were bypassing multiple layers of defense at once to run their own code. They get in, and bam, they own the system.
What I found fascinating here was the sophistication of how they delivered the exploit. The sources said attackers delivered malware using Java expression, language injection, EL injection via HTTP GET requests. Now, for listeners who aren't developers, what exactly does EL injection let an attacker do that maybe a standard payload doesn't?
Well, it essentially allows the attacker to execute commands by embedding them inside data structures that the server is designed to process and interpret anyway. So instead of sending one big, obvious block of malicious code, the attackers were actually fragmenting their payloads. They base64 encoded the code, wrote it in little pieces to temporary directories on the target system, and then basically had the system reconstruct the malware itself internally.
So hang on, it's like taking a big bomb, breaking it into tiny, harmless-looking pieces, mailing those pieces through the security checkpoint one by one, and then reassembling the bomb safely inside the target's network. That sounds like a textbook evasion tactic.
That's a perfect analogy, yeah. Classic evasion. And look, while these flaws were actually patched months ago, back in May 2025, the fact they're being actively exploited now just confirms that window between patch release and weaponization is collapsing. It's getting shorter and shorter. And it wasn't just your run-of-the-mill cyber criminals either. Earlier intelligence reports suggested this campaign might actually be linked to a Chinese state-sponsored actor, specifically targeting an organization down in Australia.
Wait a second. If this was sophisticated state-sponsored activity, why are they bothering with vulnerabilities patched back in May? Doesn't that kind of suggest that either, we're just not patching fast enough, or maybe state actors have so many targets they don't even need 0 days?
It's mostly the latter, and that's a critical point for organizations listening. They don't need a 0 day if they know, say, 80% of potential targets haven't applied a 2-month-old update. It really shows that a fundamental lack of security hygiene is often the biggest vulnerability they exploit.
Okay, and speaking of fundamental hygiene failures, let's shift to the GeoServer breach. This takes us away from commercial mobile management and into an open-source platform, one used by government agencies. CISA detailed this breach of a U.S. Federal Civilian Executive Branch agency, an FCE agency, that happened back in mid-July 2024.
Yeah, this one is a classic and frankly frustrating example. The attackers used a severe remote code execution vulnerability in GeoServer. That's CVE 2024-36401. It had a near maximum severity score, 9.8 out of 10. And GeoServer is critical because it's used for sharing and publishing geospatial data. That often means it holds some very sensitive operational information.
The timeline here is what really got me. It's alarming. The vulnerability was publicly disclosed June 30th, CISA added it to their known exploited vulnerabilities catalog, the KEV list, by July 15th, confirming, okay, this is being actively exploited. But by that point, the attackers had already established persistence on the first GeoServer instance within the agency, and then, just 9 days later, they breached a second one.
It just shows attackers are weaponizing these newly published critical CVEs in hours, maybe days, definitely not weeks anymore. The GeoServer incident really demonstrates the speed organizations need to react. And once they were inside, the attackers didn't mess around. They used powerful recon tools like Burp Suite and FleaScan to map the internal network, moved laterally, and then deployed the notorious China Chopper web shell.
China Chopper. That name rings a bell. It's an oldie but a goodie in the hacker toolkit, right?
Right.
Why do sophisticated threat actors still rely on tools that are, like, decades old?
Because it works. And it's deceptively simple. China Chopper is this tiny web shell, often fits into just a single line of code. That makes it incredibly hard to spot in logs or during endpoint security sweeps. But it provides persistent remote access and lets them execute commands. Simple, effective. The lesson CISA really emphasized from this whole incident was blunt. Timely patching isn't just best practice, it's a survival requirement now, and you absolutely need tested incident response plans. If you can't act within hours of a KEV notice, you're already behind the curve.
Okay, so while we're frankly dealing with the embarrassment of failing at Security 101 patching known flaws, our adversaries are already moving on to, well, like 3D chess. Let's talk about the fundamental shift we're seeing with AI-driven threats. Specifically, this zero-click vulnerability found in ChatGPT's deep research agent. It's been dubbed ShadowLeak.
Yeah, this is a major concern, especially for any organization that's relying on large language models like ChatGPT for internal data synthesis or research. ShadowLeak, which Radware discovered, is a purely server-side vulnerability. That means the attacker can potentially exfiltrate sensitive internal DataThink emails, CRM records, maybe proprietary reports autonomously, directly from OpenAI's servers.
We hear the term zero-click thrown around a lot, but this one seems particularly chilling because it operates completely independent of the user's own computer or network defenses. How does that even work? How do you trick an autonomous agent like that?
Well, the agent's core job is to synthesize and summarize information it's fed. Researchers figured out that by sending an email containing highly specific hidden instructions, sort of like subtle malware commands hidden in the prompt, the deep research agent reads the email. And then, in its effort to just follow those instructions, it autonomously initiates network requests to leak the synthesized data to an external server controlled by the attacker.
So the prompt isn't literally saying, steal this data. It's more like it's tricking the AI by saying, summarize the most sensitive content you have access to and send it to this external server for, let's say, analysis.
Precisely. The agent is just doing its job, synthesizing and communicating. But the attacker has weaponized that core function. And when you consider that ChatGPT reports having over 5 million paying business users and enterprises are constantly feeding these systems internal data, well, this vulnerability meant your sensitive info could potentially be compromised just by the agent processing one malicious input. The defense has to shift here. It means implementing extremely strict access controls and user permissions for the AI tools themselves, alongside continuous human oversight, especially when autonomous agents handle sensitive stuff.
Okay, so if ShadowLeak represents AI as this kind of sophisticated, invisible spy, then the discovery of LLM-enabled malware called Malterminal, well, that represents AI as an actual execution engine. This is where it gets really interesting, right? Sentinel alone found this tool uses GPT-4 to generate malicious payloads dynamically on the fly.
This is what we call a qualitative shift in adversary tradecraft. It's a big deal. For decades, our defenses have heavily relied on signature detection looking for known, static pieces of malicious code. Malterminal, however, uses something like GPT-4 to dynamically generate the malicious logic, say, a custom ransomware encryptor or a reverse shell at the moment of execution.
Wow. So it's not just polymorphic malware that changes its signature slightly. The actual malicious code literally does not exist until the attacker prompts the LLM through the malware, and the LLM spits out brand new, bespoke code designed specifically for that target right then and there.
Exactly. The prompt might be something like, create a Python reverse shell that targets this specific IP address and make sure it bypasses firewalls common in Windows 11 environments. The LLM's response is the code, tailored in real time. Sentinel noted this just sailed past traditional scanning methods because there's no pre-existing malicious code signature to look for. The code gets written, executed, and then potentially just discarded.
That sounds like the start of a really difficult arms race for defenders. And the fact that Sentinel alone suspects this tool, which apparently used an old API endpoint, might be the earliest known example of AI-powered malware. That means this isn't some future threat. It's basically here now. It's a clear signal that defenders really need to start moving beyond reliance on just static detection models. Right, let's pivot now to the more visible, maybe more immediate real-world consequences we've seen recently from both digital and physical failures. Let's start with some major industry breaches. Boyd Gaming, the big casino and hospitality company, they confirmed a cyber incident. Resulted in theft of sensitive data on employees, and they said a limited number of other individuals.
Yeah, Boyd confirmed the theft, but they were pretty careful in their statement to say that business operations were not materially impacted. They also expect their cyber insurance to cover the forensic and legal costs. Although you should always be a little wary of corporate language like not materially impacted. That often just means the financial markets weren't significantly disrupted, not necessarily that thousands of employees aren't now facing a higher risk of identity theft.
Good point. And then on the financial services side, American Income Life, AIL, an insurance firm, was allegedly hit. Hackers are claiming they stole data on about 150,000 people.
This AIL incident is particularly alarming because of the type of data stolen. It's highly actionable: PII, names, addresses, dates of birth, policy status, even insurance plan names. That kind of data is absolute gold for targeted phishing, spear phishing campaigns, all sorts of fraud. But what makes this breach potentially even more dangerous is the attacker's apparent motive. They're reportedly offering the data for free on hacking forums. That massively increases the risk of widespread identity theft and insurance fraud because now there's basically no cost barrier for even low-level criminals to get their hands on 150,000 detailed profiles.
Wow, giving it away for free. That's concerted. Okay, finally, let's look at critical infrastructure failures that hit travelers globally recently. This offers a really neat closing contrast between digital and physical threats. First, there was that European airport chaos.
Right. The EU's cybersecurity agency, ENISA, confirmed a major disruption caused by a cyber incident. It canceled or delayed hundreds of flights across key European hubs, places like Heathrow, Brussels, Berlin, Dublin. The incident was linked back to a ransomware attack targeting Collins Aerospace's Air NCCMU system. That's a shared passenger processing system used by many airlines. It really illustrates how compromising just one single critical vendor can create this cascading failure across an entire multinational industry. One weak link breaks the chain.
Okay, now compare that to the disruption over at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, DFW, in the U.S. No sophisticated ransomware there, no AI agent involved, just pure chaos because of a physical failure.
Exactly. DFW experienced massive disruptions simply because crucial fiber optic cables were severed, physically cut. This took out both the primary and the secondary data paths for critical systems, things like radars and radio frequencies needed for air traffic control. The investigation pointed towards failures by telecommunications service providers and, significantly, oversight failures by an FAA contractor, L3 Harris. They apparently failed to ensure the system redundancies, the backups, were actually working properly.
So it's incredible. On one side of the world, you have a sophisticated digital attack, ransomware, causing massive failure. On the other side, you have this simple failure of a contractor potentially not following safety protocols, cutting a wire. And it causes the exact same result. Critical infrastructure grinds to a halt.
It really underscores an essential point about resilience, doesn't it? While the FAA is, quite rightly, pushing urgently to modernize these aging analog air traffic control systems to make them more resilient against, well, everything, they face huge bureaucratic hurdles and permitting challenges that just slow down that whole digital transition. It feels like we spend so much energy worrying about the next zero-day exploit, the sophisticated stuff, that we sometimes overlook the catastrophic vulnerability inherent in just plain old, decades-old analog infrastructure that can be brought down by a single, simple physical failure or mistake. Yeah, this week's news really shows us the dynamic nature of the threat landscape we're in. Attackers are becoming both hyper-automated, with AI-driven malware generation, and simultaneously they're still hyper-efficient at exploiting our predictable failures in basic security hygiene, like patching. The strategic imperative for any organization listening has got to be matching the dynamic nature of these threats with a constant, honest evaluation of where our own organizational blind spots lie. Are we missing the basics while chasing the advanced threats?
So what does this all mean for you? We've seen critical enterprise systems like Ivanti's brought down by a failure to patch a known, really severe vulnerability. And then we saw a critical national infrastructure, the radar systems, at a major airport like DFW, halted by a simple severed cable, potentially caused by contractor negligence. Now, given the documented push we know is happening globally to move away from these aging analog systems, it raises a really important question, I think. When we talk about cybersecurity resilience, and we invest huge sums in all this defensive technology, are we maybe focusing too much on predicting the next big zero-day exploit? And perhaps not enough on the equally catastrophic impact of simple physical decay, infrastructure neglect, and basic contractor oversight failure. It's definitely something worth mulling over. Thank you for joining us on Calm Coding. We'll be back next week with another look at the world of cybersecurity.